Welcome to the SEI podcast series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to the SEI podcast series. Warfighters in the Department of Defense operate in high-stakes environments where security, efficiency, and speed are critical. In such environments, DevSecOps has become critical in the drive toward modernization and overall mission success. A recent study led by researchers here at the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute examined the state of DevSecOps within the Department of Defense, and that's what we're here to talk about today. My name is Eileen Wrubel, and I'm a technical director here in the Software Solutions Division at the SEI. Today, I'm pleased to introduce our podcast guests, George Lamb, who's the Director for DoD Cloud and Software Modernization in the Information Enterprise Office of the DoD CIO. George leads the team responsible for the DoD Software Modernization Strategy and its associated implementation plan. And from the SEI, joining me today is Bill Nichols, who leads the SEI's engineering, measurement, and analysis work. I'd like to begin by welcoming you both to the SEI podcast series. Thank you so much for sitting down with me to talk about your work today.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to start by talking about the why of this study. Why did the DoD want this study, George, and how are you going to use it?
That's a really interesting question. It goes back to where we are in our journey. Right now, if you look at where the department is, there's still a lot of legacy systems. We've been looking at how do we modernize the entire department's IT base. We started 4 or 5 years ago with a really sort of a seminal study looking at the software is never done, changing the mindset that we have to do things faster and that really software is enabling almost like a weapon. It's not this sort of add-on, it's actually the tool that we use to go to battle. And you can see that in like the things that are happening now with Ukraine. There's this information, and the application of information is such a powerful force. So we've been on this journey for 4 years. If you look at the private sector, DORA and Google have been doing a great job with the state of DevOps. So we kind of modeled on that to understand really where we are. It's taken a while to get here. In terms of maturity, I think now is a really, really interesting point to put a substantial document out on the state of DevSecOps in the department to explain the maturity that we're at and to really position where we need to change from here on. So if you look, the past couple of years were mostly initial ideas, experimentation, pilots. We've done some amazing things in the DevSecOps world, but we haven't transformed the guts of the department. With the new administration in particular, we're looking at much more rapid change. We're looking at adopting a lot of the guidance that we've turn it into policy. So it's a good time to lay down the baseline, like where do we really come from? What are some of the fundamental challenges? And how do we change from a concept into an institutionalized, really a business of running the IT for the department as something that puts weapons into the hands of warfighters very rapidly and sort of at the pace of modern information. I hate to say modern warfare, but the way that things are happening in the battlefield is kind of scary. It's kind of fast. And we need to have the enterprise able to actually react and be part of that change.
I wish I could remember the source of this quote, but a phrase I've always loved is that agility is the ability to turn on a dime for a dime. And that feels very much to me like what you're talking about, the ability to advance quickly towards our objectives, to be able to pivot in the face of changing technology and changing threat environments, and continuously be able to deliver software-enabled capability to the warfighter wherever and whenever it's needed.
The only thing I'd be questioning, it's not really for a dime. There's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of capability that's necessary to make that change happen very quickly. But yes, to move as fast as we can and to have the infrastructure that we can do that securely. If you look at DevOps, that's how the industry works. DoD is DevSecOps. We don't do anything without understanding what's the implications for our security. And we don't want to be callous about that. But we want to have that sec tooling in the middle as part of the overall infrastructure so it doesn't slow us down. If it was to be DevOps sec, that's how it is now, and it doesn't work. But DevSecOps, where Sec is actually built into the factory, that's a key aspect. And that's sort of what makes us able to move very quickly.
So, George, can you tell me a little bit about why the DoD chose to partner with SEI researchers to execute this study?
That's an easy question. We at the CIO level, we know how a lot of the big structures work, but we don't have the researchers that are like in the programs developing like the SEI does. Sort of the intimacy SEI has with a lot of programs and the insight really from the academic and the quantitative perspective. That was what's necessary to turn a strategy document into an insightful document. So that's why we really reached out to SEI for that insight and the quantitative expertise to bring data and to bring numbers to bear, and not just to have a strategy that was kind of, this is a good thing to do. We wanted to have that quantification inside of the document.
To really integrate those empirical analytical insights with the good software practice and the good security practice right from the start, so that we're moving out with executable policy where we understand when we're making progress and we understand when we're hitting our goals.
Yeah, and you're seeing so much data analytics is informing a lot of our decision making. A lot of time it's intuition. We know industry gets a lot of speed out of DevOps. We can see what's happening, but we want to get that quantitative basis in here and at least get the data so we can make decisions more in the future. So that was kind of the special spin, and that was really, I think, what SEI brought to the table.
So let's talk about the major findings. How would you characterize the present state of DevSecOps in the DoD based on what we uncovered, all the people that we talked to, and all of the analytical, backbone?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen the document. It's going to be out soon. It's got a great picture with DevOps in the middle.
So excited.
The first thing we wanted to do is just capture the success stories, because there have been some amazing success stories in DevSecOps that really should be highlighted across the department. So we wanted to base it on what have people done right, overcoming all the institutional barriers, the procedural, the policy barriers to be successful. So we wanted to get those down, and they're across the fourth estate, they're across the services. So that's kind of the basis, like what are we doing right? And then the second big piece was, how do we turn this into the default way of doing business? So we want more programs to be successful. We want more programs to deliver this rapid capability. And the way that we're looking at the software factories, kind of in the department, it's actually like a bunch of services. It's not necessarily a centralized organization. So each of the services, the Air Force, Navy, Army, and Space Force and Marines, they're all managing their own software ecosystems. At the CIO level, we put consistency across that. So we wanted to understand how they're being managed as business units. So how they're looking at the portfolio of software factories, how they're looking at different aspects of their mission space, and applying the DevSecOps to all of those aspects of the mission space. So that's kind of the transformation that we're seeing right now in the department, that we're at that point where we're standing up offices in all of the departments, and it's happening naturally. There's a great study by the Navy looking at the state of their software factories and starting to optimize it. Which ones are being the most effective? Where is their overlaps? Where are their gaps? And how do we move pieces around to cover the entire business space? So you're seeing that across the board. So we wanted to call that out and say that this is really a strategic maturity state that we're starting to manage the business in DevSecOps and information management. And then we wanted to capture where we see fundamental issues. So things like, where is the policy inconsistent? How about the funding models? There's lots of different ways that money flows in the department. Some are more effective than others. And how are those funding models applied? How is the resourcing happening? When we try and do a transformation from an old to new, there's a lot of legacy skills that need to be updated. We have to partner with organizations. So you have to bring in the third estate. You have to bring in the defense industrial base. You have to bring in small innovative companies. Some of the work coming out of DIU, where these startups are coming in. So we have to figure out how we're going to sort of change that space. And looking at how the other programs that are successful have done that, that is just fascinating, sort of the partnering, the lessons learned. So that's kind of where I think the key lessons are. One is that there have been successes. This is the right way to go. We've proven that. It hasn't been institutionalized. We're starting to actually manage it as an institution. We're starting to see the pieces that you need to turn it in. And then the other major thing that we're doing from the CIO's office is we're starting to change a lot of the policy that's used to build software. So if you look at existing policy, it's still basically encoded for waterfall and the big processes that take many years. We're trying to take all these lessons in the next year, maybe 6 months to a year, we're moving pretty quickly in this, to change the fundamental policy to mandate this. And you can see in the acquisition space with the software acquisition pathway, driving the way that we fund programs, and then pushing that to how we test programs instead of testing at the end, testing at the beginning, how we drive cyber across programs. Once again, understanding the risk management framework and the ATO process, driving that into the beginning of the process. There's lots of different pieces. So fundamentally changing how the architecture of building software is policy in the department.
We were really busy.
It's been a busy year trying to see how everything is working. We're not there, but we're understanding in a really good place. And this is it's so exciting being, it's kind of like the cusp of transformation, going from a startup into a really business where we can start delivering, the growth models and, get a payoff on the dividends we're putting in.
Really capitalize on proven practices in these different contexts and different mission spaces to help continuing to expand our innovation capacity and our ability to adapt and to pivot.
Yeah, it's so exciting to go to software factories. I mean, they've done incredible work, and we really want to just champion the work that's happening in these software factories deliver. And you don't see them unless you're in that mission system where they're pushing stuff to the end product. So putting that visibility out, and then use that as an example to build policy so we can do more of that across the department.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the software factories. Because we talk in the study about how prescriptive measurements, right? One size doesn't fit all. We talk about that in a lot of different ways. I'd like to focus a little bit on the empirical findings about the behaviors of the software factories in the different mission spaces, because I think that what we uncovered there was really, I think, is really going to be important too when we talk about the efficiency of these organizations and being able to help leaders identify the appropriate business models and appropriate measurements for understanding the achievement of outcomes. This was really interesting to me, what we uncovered here from a quantitative perspective that backs up the insights that we've had.
Well, that was really one of the things that jumped out at me. George asked at the beginning of this to try to find something, a takeaway, some key piece of information that's interesting from each of these topic areas. And wow, this one just jumped out at us. We looked at several different types of software factory, and there were already some categorizations. Like some of these were primarily made for training not just the engineers, but training the soldiers. Some of these were mission critical. Others were really focused on providing the DevSecOps pipeline capabilities as a service and how to stand these up. And what we found was there were some subtle differences in the culture. And well, to give you an example, in the mission critical, of all of the DevSecOps cultural attributes, the one that came to the top was leadership. You needed strong leadership. However, when you went to these more educational pipelines, the most critical attribute was learning. And then when you went to the infrastructure as code pipelines, those who were responsible for how to stand these things up, it turned out to be collaboration and stakeholder. And we realized there's no single way of evaluating each of these pipelines as a group. You have to think about what are their individual goals. And these different types of pipelines had clearly different goals. So they don't get evaluated quite the same way. And that was something that should be obvious in retrospect. But when we looked at it from a cultural perspective, it really jumped out at us.
And so that helps us understand what behaviors and practices are really prevalent, are really strong in different organizations versus where there might be less emphasis on different kinds of activities based on the mission outcomes that are prioritized in those different spaces for those different software factories.
And it has a profound effect on how you choose leadership for these different types of pipeline. The leaders have to be attuned to what are their real goals, and they have to provide that environment.
Yeah, I think when Bill talks about leadership, a good example is in the weapon systems or the production systems. The biggest challenge isn't developing the software, it's getting the software into production, right? You have to really understand how it's going into production, who the end users are, what systems are currently there that need to be replaced or to be migrated out. So it used to be like people would think the Big Bang would happen and all of a sudden a new system appears. And that really doesn't work in the department. It's got to be an evolutionary step out, but there's a lot of other stakeholders. So that leadership is a lot of understanding what the end impact is and how do I get into production. And we see failed systems that don't get into production. And it's typically because not that the software or the technology or the process failed, but it's the leadership to manage that change. And that one is kind of, it just jumps right out you. We have amazing infrastructure as code and the pipelines, and folks can do that. And that can get into production because it's going to software factories. But pushing the end result of the software factory is getting through the authorization boundaries. It's really an interesting problem.
So you talked about the importance of leadership, both of you, and there's a great success story. There's a number of success stories that we share throughout the study, but there's one we dedicated significant real estate to, which was the story of MEPCOM, the U.S. Military Entrance Processing Command. And for listeners who haven't been through that process, MEPCOM basically that's where we screen and medically process recruits from all the different processing stations around the country. That's folks who are signing on the dotted line to step into a uniform. And so that's critical to everything that we do with our defense workforce, is actually bringing them in the door to begin with. So I'm wondering, George, if you could tell us a little bit about the MEPCOM story, give our listeners a little bit to look forward to when we publish the study about what they can expect to learn.
Yeah, so you really hit it on the head. These are the customers for MEPCON are high school students and college students that are going to join the military. So a very important mission. We base our goals on our recruiting from the systems that they use. It was an old system. It was a mainframe system. I think it was built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, still ran on mainframes. They knew it had to be changed. It wasn't meeting the goals, but it was so embedded into many other systems that it was really hard to untangle it. And there were two tries. Matt Lentz, the man that actually wound up being responsible for the MEPCON transformation, he talks about the two systems that they failed miserably on because they couldn't take it into a production system. There wasn't the authority to take it in. There were too many people that said, no, this isn't ready. It's too risky. So that leadership was an important aspect. Centralizing the decision-making, it didn't really kick in until Matt was given the 51% vote on any major decisions, which is, it's kind of unheard of in the department where one person has the majority vote on taking into production. But it was so critical for MEPCOM to make this transformation. The staff that was maintaining the old systems, they were ready to retire. Like that was the linchpin. There was going to be nobody to retire if they didn't continue to modernize. And then the way that he reached out across the board, he came to CIO, he went to the Defense Digital Network, our DDS, Defense Digital Service, to find the best practices. So it was really an understanding what are the options here. He did very unique things about public-private partnerships, pulling in small companies that could do DevSecOps, that had that expertise, marrying it with the best developers that were in the MEPCON world, taking some of the leaders from other key programs and bringing them together. And then when they went into production, they were live with a 24-hour help desk for any problems that happened for the first month of production. So it was a very focus on how do we get this into production. They knew it was a mission critical system, so if recruiting stops, it was a problem. So the recruiters, they would be online, they would report bugs in, and this is another unheard of thing. They would call the help desk. It was open to everyone that had an issue. So everyone could see the remediation happening. They could see the changes happen in effect, and the changes would flow through the pipeline and get into production system within 24 hours. So it was instantaneous change. A beautiful example. The first system was minimal. The key was minimally viable, compliant. It didn't have any of the bells and whistles. It did have the integration, like some of the hard problems, integration to the banking system, integration to the records. But that minimum viable concept was the first piece. And the younger users liked it. Some of the people that were experiencing it, all this capability is missing. But within the first week, they stabilized it. Within the first month, it was actually running at speed. And then gradually, every month, every release, more functionality came in. And that was the big transformation. That's the story I like to take, is you have to be able to accept what's there and work with it, but then trust that it's going to get better. And that trust is a key part of the leadership. And it continues to get better. They finished that system. It's completely production. There were 8 systems in MEPCOM, so he's going on the other systems. A great example of the leadership, the functionality, the right ways to do things. Some of the lessons learned have been published out across the department. And just a modernization. It's great to see when it happens. So yeah, there's a great product out there. So the recruiters come in, the high school students, they have something that works on their cell phones. They have something that works in the environments that they're used to. It's no longer going and sit in front of a recruiter on a teletype. So it's truly modernized, and it's making a difference in how we staff the Department of Defense.
Trust and collaboration are the coin of the realm when we talk about agile software development, iterative incremental production. We talk about DevSecOps, and so the choices that they made there, I think, regarding the absolute transparency of the process. It was kind of taking a risk to open up that phone number to anybody and everybody without going through some traditional wickets, and that seems to have really built up trust in the process that they were going to continue to deliver on the capability that they promised and continue to bring their stakeholders along with them, and the outreach to other leaders to learn about best practices and build different kinds of innovative partnerships. I think really shows that really shows leadership that's committed to linking arms and looking at being able to satisfy, you taking a value-oriented perspective to satisfying the goals of all the different stakeholders in the process.
Yeah, it's like throwing away the old way of doing business, adopting a new way. Prioritizing is key. Another fascinating story is they transitioned like 400 necessary bug fixes from the old system into their backlog. And with the new system came in, they realized that none of those were actually necessary. The new process had fixed all of that backlog. So they got rid of tech debt at the same time. So many benefits of doing this new approach.
That's fantastic.
And to build on what George has been talking about, what I found really fascinating about this experience, talking to Matt, he's not an IT guy. And to a large extent, that's why he was successful. It's kind of counterintuitive that a non-IT guy would be able to drive the success of this program. But he was a professional who was able to find ways to say yes, running into all of these different institutional barriers, like where do you go for recruiting? How do you get these certain agreements in place? He knew how to get things done. And that's kind of what we need to do in the DevOps world, figure out how to get these done in this environment. What needs to change? And a lot of these aren't necessarily against the rules, but it's not the way we did business. And he was able to find a way to make the other people see his point of view and how to get it done.
It sounds like he didn't have a lot of underlying assumptions about how things had to work because this wasn't his prior typical mission space. And if you don't have the preconceived notions to begin with, it's a lot easier to climb out away from them, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. And he had the right skill set. He had the skill set you really needed to be successful here.
So it's fascinating to me that the success story that we really fell in love with, because it displayed pretty much every aspect of the journey, and lots of great collaboration and just such a strong example of leadership. It strikes me that story is effectively about the very first entry point after the recruiter that our DoD workforce has in joining the force. George, you talked about the SWAT study earlier and how it highlighted challenges faced by our software workforce in the DoD. You all see what I did there. I went from workforce to workforce. But it talked about the need for real specialized software-focused career paths and continuous support for those professionals. So I know that we talked in the study about a lot of the strategic efforts that the DoD has taken on specifically to build and sustain a robust workforce for software and DevSecOps. And George, I'm wondering if you can tell us about some of those critical efforts and where they stand now.
Yeah, I think probably the most interesting thing when I got here, there were no software engineers in the department. Engineers were a different category. So looking at the software landscape, we've been working with the folks that code the different job roles and the different capabilities of those roles, and they've transformed how the roles actually exist. So instead of being more of a rigid process, there's now key roles in place, and then their job categories and capabilities associated with that is now a dynamic list. So we can actually build work roles that reflect the skills that are needed. So that sort of not necessarily changing the old system, but transforming how we think about the skill sets that are involved. So now we have a much better ability to staff more accurately. That's just within the internal workforce. The second critical piece is understanding the partnership. And if you go to the software factories, one of the key aspects is it's badgeless. You can't really tell if you're enlisted, if you're civilian, if you're a contractor. So bringing together teams, and this is an agile, just a basic agile tenet, but in the military where things are so regimented, it's important to sort of reflect that different kind of skills, both inside the military and outside, are necessary to bring to bear. It's a workforce management, but it's also an acquisition process. Like, how do we bring in new contractors and have the ability to change people, bring in different skills as things flow through the process, and then to have generalists that could be in different roles. So you get someone that's a really good architect on one sprint, and you want to keep them on another sprint. You want to have a particular developer that has a skill and moving between, because we have many different pipelines running at the same time. Many sprints are running, things are concurrent. You want to have a lot more flexibility in the acquisition process and the assignment of skills to roles. So I think those are probably the two big things. First is getting rid of the rigidity of how we sort of categorize people, and then bringing in the flexibility to take these new skills that quite frankly don't exist in the department, or now they exist, but they're not widespread. And how do we multiply the amount of skills quickly, both through augmenting what we have and then transitioning and mentoring and learning on the job.
So I'm seeing a picture come together, right, where we talked about developing those quantitative and analytical insights about what's happening in the software factories. What is it? How are we evaluating progress, process? How are we understanding the connection between engineering activity and the value actually delivered to the warfighter, and understanding when we talk about the business models then for the software organizations, how do they need to be staffed, and what kinds of funding do they need to be able to deliver capability in a continuous way, but also to be able to adapt capacity in the face of new innovation, or in the face of changing threat environments, or in the face of a changing workforce. So with a study of this magnitude, I see so much potential for impact, and the impact is really going to be more substantial with actionable insights and actionable outcomes coming out of this to drive future efforts. And so I'm wondering, George, if you could talk about next steps that the DoD is considering to address the questions in the report, and we can talk with Bill about all the exciting opportunities for developing and maintaining the analytical insight to help us understand how effectively we are moving out on those changes towards achieving our goals.
Big topics. So, on the first one, the work that we're seeing across the services, in the Navy, they stood up the new sort of portfolio management office, and they did a really deep dive in DevSecOps. In the Air Force, there's the new software directorate that's looking across all of the manufacturing for airframes. So from the fighters to the tankers to the bombers, how all of those fit together. And they've sort of brought that under one organization. There is a group that's working on the software factory, which is the pipelines and the tools that are consistent across all those. And then the separate software factories that have specialization in each one of those particular airframes. So that kind of management we're seeing happening. I think that's very quantitative. As we sort of optimize, we look at how the factories are being used, how the platforms are being used, putting the metrics across a set of factories that are all sort of similar gives us the ability to do a little bit more analytics on it. right now you can't really compare across software factories because every product's so different, every mission's so different. So we're getting better basis there. The other really big area, and I hear a lot about this in terms of the difference between the Department of Defense and commercial space, it's that SEC piece. The way in the report we frame it is continuous authorization to operate. CATO is kind of the transformation from traditional authorization, which is very manual and paper-based, into a continuous process where we're using the tooling of DevSecOps, the tooling of actually DevOps, to put the gateways in place, to put promotion, the migration of software as it goes through development into test, into production. There's so much analytics in that space. Just using the GitHubs, the GitLabs, the basic tooling gives us incredible insight. And in two ways I've sort of put out. One is the sort of the process flow through that. So to understand how we can get ATO a little bit faster, how we can make it continuous so that someone that's looking at the process doesn't have to look at the end product. They can look at how the product was made, which is actually a lot more insightful. And if you understand how the product was made, you feel a little bit more confident, even though the end product is it's going to do a particular function. That process that makes it, and by checking every step of the process, gives a lot more assurance. That's going to move the ATO process a lot faster. The second really interesting piece is the supply chain. So when we look at building software, there's the factory that makes it, but there's all the pieces that go into that factory. Open source, third-party libraries, pieces of existing components that have to be integrated. So DevSecOps gives us a really good handle on understanding what's coming into the process, knowing what's built into the product, so which open source libraries are used. We're working a lot with the CATO, also looking at the RMF process, which has always been very manual. Sort of the buzzword that I'm hearing now is automated RMF, which goes hand in hand with continuous ATO. So we're looking at how do we accelerate that whole cyber and get that SEC piece so it's not something that makes the department much slower or much different, but how it can happen instantaneously, happen more securely. And then what I'd actually love to see is this lessons that we have, the insight that we have by securing our pipelines goes back into the general public. And it starts feeding the way that software in the United States is built to be more secure overall. So taking lessons learned from the department, quantifying them, putting really good information as to what's the value of this extra SEC that we're putting into it, what tools we're using, how we do it through reference designs, and then understanding what the business value we get out of that is. So lots of places for data to be used, both in making our product faster and making it more secure, and then sharing it and understanding how to manage it as a business.
And I think in so many of these cases, you talked about data existing in the infrastructure, right? It's there, and there can be a tendency to treat it as either as exhaust,
exactly,
or to say, oh, I have all this data, let me collect it all, without stopping to think mindfully about it. There's sort of two ends of that. And I know, Bill, you have some great thoughts about how we can smartly use the data that we know exists in all of our development and security infrastructure moving forward. So,
absolutely, yeah. Well, one of the things that we recommend all the time is you never want to have just one source of data. You need to be able to look at things from a number of different perspectives. As George suggested, it's not just an outcome. An outcome is a result of a process. So we need to be able to look at the individual processes to understand what they're trying to accomplish and understand, are they doing what they expect to do? Are they getting the outputs? Now, one of the nice things about DevSecOps is it's made process respectable again. And you have a lot of measurement opportunities in DevSecOps. So our challenge moving forward is to understand what is the information that we can extract from these processes that's going to give us the information and the confidence that these products are secure, the confidence that we're going to be able to meet our commitments.
I love that you said making process respectful again.
we need to make that a tagline. That's a great quote, Bill. I like that.
I think we're going to start using that in a bunch of places, because sometimes there is a tendency for folks who don't think about who don't think about the process around what they build. There can be a tendency to think about executing a process for the sake of executing the process, right? Going through the checklist for the sake that, and that's when something becomes a checklist as opposed to a way of thinking. the benefits that we see in terms of speed and efficiency and adaptability from adopting DevSecOps processes really does. I love that. I'm going to start using that everywhere. Make process respectable again. But I also think that from what you said, Bill, the insight that we can get now from understanding processes. George, you talked about this in terms of supply chain, but a well-instrumented process where we're collecting data that we can tie to the achievement of value and the outcomes that we're looking for. That goes all the way back to the trust that our user community needs to have in the folks that are building software, mission software, that it's going to be the right thing in the right time, at the right place. The trust that it's going to be secure, it's going to do all the things it's supposed to do, it's not going to do any of the things that it's not supposed to do. And when you put all of those things together, making process respectful again means you get that trust, you get that confidence that I'm going to have the thing I need when I need it, in Ukraine or in Washington or in Boyers, Pennsylvania or San Antonio.
Good outcomes should not be an accident. There should be a predictable thread that runs through everything you do to get to that outcome.
Yeah, it's like when you get patches for your computer, there used to be a day and age when you were worried about it, but now you understand that those patches are necessary. Like there's some kind of risk that's in there. And we need to get to the point where we can take things that come out of the software factory and we can run with them confidently.
So I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with Bill this time. We worked together extensively for probably over a year, understanding the goals of this study and reaching out to people and collecting information and slicing it and dicing it to really understand the story and put together some recommendations and a playbook for moving forward. Was there anything that really surprised you over the course of this study?
Well, I don't know. I certainly wasn't surprised at the commitment we found among so many of the people we interviewed. That really stood out. But that shouldn't be surprising. I think if there was something that was surprising, it was one of the things we learned from the MEPSCOM, and that was that it literally was not the technical expertise that made this effective. It was the leadership ability to get things done. And I love the way Matt put it, was finding a way to say yes.
I appreciate that. And George, you got a little bit of time to think about that since I made Bill answer me first.
I did. So the thing that is kind of interesting, but at the CIO office, we know a lot about how things are operating. When we started this, we just asked SCI to go figure it out. And we gave you some guidance, but at the end of the day, when you went and figured it out, you kind of got to the place that we thought we were at. So it was a good check that we're at that like critical transformation. We actually do know what we're doing. It's just a good gut check. In terms of how we got here, I think the process was pretty consistent. So we did a software, we did the DibSwap report, then we did the software modernization strategy. We did a 2-year plan. We wrapped that one at 24. Now we're going to the state of DevSecOps report to tell us where we are, kind of like going back and saying that those 2 years we spent implementing actually were effective. Now we're starting the next 2-year implementation plan. And I'm pretty excited about where we're going with that. But in terms of surprises, it wasn't necessarily surprise, but it was interesting seeing the SEI sort of come to the same conclusions that we are in a pretty good place. This is a really good story. We were expecting to have a lot more recommendations, a lot more criticism, and I think it came out to be a fairly positive report.
It did, and what really struck me was the ability when we stood back and looked at everything, the ability to say, "Wow!" So we know where the people on the leading edge of the change wave. We know where they might still be bumping up against things where they have to be the first mover, where there's unanswered questions. But that consistently what we saw was that all the efforts that CIO and the services were moving out on indicated that the leadership in the department and the services very much had their ear to the ground about the things that were most compelling, where people were asking for the most help and were already moving out on those things. And that to me speaks to really good engagement, across the department with the community, both at the service and component level and down, in software development teams. that was really exciting to see.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work doing communication. It's so hard. Like Bill said, it's not technical, it's leadership and communication. The three of them are, you have to fit all three together to do a transformation.
Absolutely.
And my favorite quip from George Bernard Shaw is, the greatest problem with communication is the illusion that it's happened.
It does speak to understanding how the data we use is effective to the different stakeholders about about telling the story, about achieving outcomes and achieving value, or finding situations where we need to find additional support or additional investment. But the data do tell the story. So on that note, I'm going to wrap us up, but I'm going to ask if each of you want to offer up any one final thought, question, or call to action for our listeners before we conclude today's podcast. And I'll start with you, George.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that the challenge we have going forward is taking what we've done and turning it into actions. So we've got a good baseline, things like the flow metrics, getting the business metrics so we can actually look at them a little bit more carefully. So going beyond the pipelines, the number, and understanding at that business level. I think that's really the big challenge going forward. And then some of the playbooks. So we're just starting a study right now on working with some of the folks at SEI on organizational structure. What makes a DoD program different than a traditional program? And what's the right balance of resources in that program? So very practical business things as we do larger transformations. When our program comes and says, what do I need to look like to do modern development? I think those kind of very practical things are where we need to go next. So I'm looking at, I'm forward. We're done with the 1-year study. Let's just do a couple of these are really focused, kind of interesting questions. And there's so many interesting questions that we can answer. But I think as we're going to start looking at the overall flow metrics and end-to-end, and then looking at how we can help some of these legacy programs become more agile and more modern.
And Bill, do you have some final thoughts for our listeners?
Final thought is the DoD is an immense organization. And as different as the DoD is from commercial industry, the DoD has so many that are really different from each other. So there's going to be an awful lot of work trying to understand how to make this effective department-wide.
There's no shortage of good and interesting problems to solve.
Lots of interesting problems.
It's a fascinating place. Hopefully people will actually go out and use the MEMCOM system, join the department. We have good, fun problems to go after.
We do. And they're so important every day. You can always see, it's one of the things I love about working here, is you can always see the straight line to the mission.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to thank you both for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today about this study. For all our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to include links in the transcript to all the resources that we talked about in this podcast. The SEI podcast series is available in all the places you regularly find your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and the SEI's very own YouTube channel. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.